Welcome
So,
back.
welcome back. Yeah. So, for new folks that may be joining us today, Payson, do you want to do a little quick intro of why we're here?
Sure. So I'm Peixin, and Vivian and I met in business school. I work in tech, specifically in gaming, the entertainment side, and live in LA. Viv?
I live in San Francisco, and I work in investments.
We started this because we wanted to share our point of view on different world topics, whether it's business, society, finance, government, social. We'll get to the various things. But we figured there's not a lot of podcasts with people who are kind of in the middle of this stage of life, 30s, give or take, and in the middle of our careers.
Be careful not to out our ages. I think we're getting to that time of life.
I have never really understood that, but maybe one day I will. I'm just not there yet.
I mean, I think you're just aging gracefully, and all of us should aspire to be
Oh,
like that.
oh, you too. You too.
Thanks.
So what's today's topic, Viv?
So today's topic, unfortunately, I don't think is as happy-go-lucky as we're our chit-chatting typically is, but fires, LA, Payson, you live there, so I imagine that's a very serious and prominent topic for you right now. How is it on the ground? I mean, we've heard some terrible things, but what is it like living in LA at the moment?
The tragedies, I would say, have passed the kind of actual fires themselves. Although we had a little scare about a week ago again, and we're recording this podcast Jan 30. So the fires have been, I think, now 3 weeks away. But the the now comes the rebuild phase, and the disaster has left two major parts of LA. For anyone who's not familiar, really in devastation. One is the Palisades area that's nearby the Pacific Ocean, very high and some of the most expensive real estate in the world. The other major fire source was in an area called Altadena, which is all the way east LA near the San Gabriel Mountains. And Altadena is more of a mixed neighborhood, historically Black, and now has also some more, let's say, middle and more wealthy people living there as well. But those neighborhoods are really destructed. And I think the good thing coming out of this is there's a lot of feeling of togetherness and community. Fire is a non-partisan issue, so everybody feels motivated and united. And for example, tonight there is a concert in LA that is last minute organized and has Olivia Rodrigo, a lot of big names performing. That's all donations are going for fire relief. So that hope, I think, is there. But it's no joke that, we're in this situation. So maybe we can start, Viv. Tell us a little bit about why fires happen for those who might not know so much.
The most serious condolences to the people who have lost their homes and facing a lot of disruption and kind of heartache from everything that's happened. Up in Northern California, we're also no stranger to fires, of course. Some of the worst ones in history, like the Camp Fire in 2018, was up here. So this isn't a SoCal only phenomenon. I would say that typically the SoCal NorCal divide is strong. The rivalry is strong, but I think this is something that bonds us together. So why fires? I mean, fires are a natural phenomenon. I think part of the reason they've gotten so destructive is that we've sort of forgotten that fact, and a lot of it has to do with fires, overly and overly strong emphasis on fire suppression. But it's a natural phenomenon, and it's definitely something that impacts this area because of the dryness, right? The desert climate, and as the years have gone on, they've gotten drier. There's been less rainfall on average. But the other issue is the volatility around the seasons. Is that it was very dry a few years ago. Then there was a lot of rain. The rain built up vegetation, which creates material to burn. And so this oscillation between dryness, which creates fires, and wetness that creates the material to burn, has created a lot of potential for devastation. Um, so that is, it is a natural phenomenon, but there are other things that impact it, like where people choose to build their homes, and as well as the type of homes they choose to build, and how they choose to decorate, and their homes, all of that is going to impact the level of fires. And my understanding, I mean, you would know more about this, but my understanding is the situation in LA was just like a confluence of all these factors, right? The
Yeah.
winds,
Yeah.
the weather, dryness, all of that created just the worst environment where the firefighters couldn't even fight the fires for like the first few
Yeah.
days, right?
Yeah, and especially like the Santa Ana winds were insane. They were so high. I think it was like 30 miles per hour, such that you can't, like you said, you can't be flying helicopters or
Right.
anything in that to extinguish the fire. So definitely a confluence of a lot of different factors. And I think you made a good point that we forget fire is something that humankind has dealt with for thousands of years. And it is something we will continue having to deal with, for thousands and thousands of years. And I think in this situation, having read a little bit about it, the different takes that other people have had, I think that this was not a circumstance that was maybe a shock to insurance companies or a shock to in terms of risk profiling. This was not a question of if these fires were to happen, but just a matter of when.
I mean, there was definitely, it came out afterwards that a number of insurance companies had started to pull plans from the area prior to the fire because they just, yeah, assessed that the risk was too high. So now that, this has happened, the state needs to deal with how to rebuild and how to, ensure that homes continue to have access to insurance. I think it is a strange fact of life that humans like to live in some of the most natural disaster prone areas, like Florida, like Texas. Out here in California, we not only have wildfires, but we have earthquakes. But on the other hand, I have been spending my weekends taking a nap in my hammock and drinking a beer in the middle of January. So that's what that's the upside. I think it's
Yeah,
it's beautiful out here, but then every once in a while, nature tries to kill you.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but other
That's
than that, it's
welcome to
quite nice.
California. That
Yeah,
and Texas. So yeah.
that and the high taxes. Yeah.
Yeah, which is also relevant for this
Hmm.
conversation because, after the fires happened, there was a lot of conversation about what was the human error that could have caused this to happen. And a lot of people went and attacked certain political parties for decisions made. Like there was a lot of conversation about how the Palisades fire had a reservoir that was
Mm.
apparently empty. So I think that was interesting. One thing that I think some people don't realize is that these wildfires, historically, a lot of them have happened farther into the mountains, in the forest area. And in those cases, it's easier to stop because it's easy. There's not buildings, there's not, there's more room for firefighters to go to kind of, you know, take care of everything versus happening in very much more dense areas that it just took like an ember to be carried by the winds to
Hmm.
land near someone's home. So that which is interesting too. It's the fire spread not because of the actual fire spreading, but just the embers
Yeah, it's the
being
wind.
blown. Yeah, and a lot of California homes are not built to be very fire resistant. All that wood is just pure fuel.
Yeah.
So where it touches taxes, though, is thinking about fire relief and fire programs and more fire prevention, all of that. That is with the government involvement, and as some people are kind of blaming, well, the government should have maybe done certain things. That all trickles down into more tax dollars as well, which I think some people forget that that's the other side of consideration. How do you weigh that risk and the cost?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, there was also a lot of controversy about, the fire department maybe getting its budget cut and things like that. But I mean, the budget of the fire department is like something like $4 billion. I mean, it's grown quite significantly over the years. What what I'm reading is that it's very difficult, no matter how many resources you have, no matter how many people you've trained and how much water you have access to. It's just not feasible to fight fires of this scale once it's reached
Yeah,
these levels. I mean, the winds were like 100 miles per hour. Like if anyone's seen 100-mile-per-hour wind videos, it's like the trees are falling down, your roofs are getting blown off. Like think about fighting a fire in this environment. It's just
yeah,
not it's just not feasible. So I really do think, the emphasis has to be a bit more on the prevention side rather than how many resources can we dedicate to fighting these catastrophic fires. Obviously, that's important to have these response teams ready and these resources ready. But it's also about, to your point, what are we building our houses out of? What is, the spacing between houses? What kind of vegetation should be allowed to grow? I think all of this, the prevention side is also incredibly important. Oh, and
Yeah,
the prescribed burns, of course. So as I mentioned earlier, some
let's
of
talk
this,
about that.
yeah, so that's one of the strategies that has been recommended and is something that, indigenous populations practice. And it's something that, again, they're saying that fire is natural, that the earth naturally goes through, is by creating smaller fires to burn down some of the vegetation. You then can help prevent these catastrophic fires that are, consuming all of the fuel that has been built up over time. So having some of these smaller prescribed burns can help you alleviate the pressure, similar to the way that smaller earthquakes alleviate the pressure on the fault lines, so that when a bigger earthquake comes, it's not quite as big, right? So I think it's a similar
Mhm.
concept.
But my understanding is that in maybe specifically in California, more so than some other areas, that the environmental concerns have meant that prescribed burns have not been done. I don't know if at all or to the extent that maybe now we're thinking they should have. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think environmental concerns. And the other one is just, it is slightly unnerving to see a fire go off, near your backyard. So I can imagine, the effects, temporary effects on, whether it's air quality or kind of just people's, unwillingness to experience that, is
Yeah.
very natural. But it is, I think it's a bit of an education process.
Yeah. Do you know if California does it at all, prescribe burns? I've never heard of this, at least in the maybe nearer to the city part of LA.
I think they have, but the other challenge as well is that you have to do a prescribed burn during certain periods of the year, right? Certain conditions, you don't want the burn to get out of control,
Red.
obviously.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges as well is that the period of time that you can do this every year is shrinking.
Mm.
But yeah, so I think that is another thing that needs to be overcome. But yeah, I mean, this is a strategy that's adopted in a lot of other countries and other places.
And building materials too. I noticed in LA specifically, both a lot of LA, honestly, like whether it's near the ocean or whether it's close to the mountains, just a lot of wood, a lot
Yeah.
of wood used in construction. I think back to when I lived in the Middle East growing up, and all the homes were made of concrete, which
Hmm.
obviously
Which
any at
it's
some
a little less
temperature,
appealing
definitely a little less appealing,
aesthetically.
maybe aesthetically, perhaps also more expensive, which I'm not
Hmm.
sure, but it's
Hmm.
interesting that the Middle East builds very heavily with concrete. That's also, they don't have, they're a desert, they don't have access to wood, right?
Yeah.
But it does call into question the resources that we build with. And this time of rebuilding, are there going to be maybe mandatory requirements
Hmm.
that the city could impose? I'm sure it's being thought about on the materials that are used.
I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, to not to keep rounding this conversation back to tax dollars, but eventually, it is going to be the state and the taxpayers that foot this bill and future bills, right? So yeah, so I mean, do you want to talk to us a little bit about one of the big questions is now the insurance landscape, right? So what's
Yeah.
happening to the insurers? Will they continue to be here? What are, alternative
Yeah.
plans? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you said, insurers have started pulling out of California from, I think, a few years now. Similar situation happening in Florida. If you guys are aware of the hurricanes there, a lot of houses just go uninsured. And the reason why is because these insurance companies realize they just can't turn a profit with offering insurance. I think there's been some legislative reasons that that's been the case. So, for example, up until maybe I want to say like last year, very recently, California insurers were not allowed to use model-based forecasts to predict risk. They could only rely on historical data. I think that was a rule, a law passed maybe in the 60s or something like that, which could work, but what I think insurance companies are realizing or had realized leading up to their starting departure was that in this world of climate change, for whatever reason, past historical data, only being able to rely on that is not profitable versus now being able to use models and prescriptive kind of forecasting. So that just changed, which should have, I guess, prior to this tragedy, brought more insurers back to California. But if we look at the case of Florida, which is, I think, further down the road in terms of insurers leaving that state, Florida has capitulated to a lot of insurance requests. So that prescriptive modeling was one.
Mhm.
There's also a requirement that if so actually let me explain something else. There are a few layers of insurance here in Florida and also in sorry, here in California, also in Florida, and also like maybe some 30 states around the nation have something called a FAIR plan, which is a now, Viv, do you know what this stands for?
I think it's Fair Access Insurance Requirements. I
Okay,
believe that's what
perfect.
it stands for. Yeah.
Amazing. I knew you would know this. Okay. So the FAIR Act was created because insurers were pulling out and local governments, state governments realized we need to provide insurance somehow for people who just wouldn't be able to purchase insurance otherwise. And what they mandated, like here in California, is that any insurer that operates, that still chooses to operate here in California, must also be pooled with other insurers as kind of like an insurer of last resort
Mhm.
for and offer insurance for homes that otherwise wouldn't be able to get insurance. So Florida has that, a lot of other states have that, but there are a lot of, I guess, regulatory hurdles and risks to the pure business model of insurance
Yeah.
that insurance companies face, which is why I think, especially in disasters, knowing fire can be such a insane disaster with the right confluence of attributes. It's just not a profitable business. So, in my
Yeah.
opinion, I think even though California, like Florida, is starting to capitulate to insurance companies, I think more and more insurers will pull out. They will keep increasing their rates, the ones who stay, and they have the
Mhm.
ability to do that now with more legislative freedom. But what does that all mean? It means people are not going to get insurance, or they're going to have to pay extremely high amounts of money to
Mhm.
get insurance. And by the way, it's not just California, like anywhere in the country, that's trickling down to your
Yeah.
insurance as well.
I mean, if I can add to that, the fair plan that California, or sorry, that Florida has, that California has also adopted. The challenge there is that even though this is an insurer of last resort, if the claims exceed the amount they have in reserves, essentially the premiums that they've collected, it means that they also run out of money, right? And so in that case, what happens is that the plan can then tax all insurance holders in the state. So in order to raise the funds that are necessary to comply with the claim. So
Yeah,
it just means that everyone else is going to be subsidizing to some extent the insurance policies of these disaster-prone houses. And then in Florida, actually, even with this plan and even with to your point, all of the changes that legislators have made, insurance are still pulling out, right?
yeah.
And for example, flooding there's a FEMA operates a flood insurance policy because no insurance will insure floods.
And
And what
what's
that means.
FEMA? Can you explain?
FEMA is the U.S. Natural Disaster Management Agency. And so they operate a state-run insurance plan, which is different than FAIR, because FAIR is still it's a state-managed plan, but it's the members are the
Private
insurance.
insurance. Mhm.
Exactly. So the National Flood Insurance Program is purely state-run, and it collects premiums. But whenever, again, this, a disaster strikes and they're unable to fulfill the claims, it has to be built out. So
Yeah,
every 10 years or so, taxpayers have
yeah.
built out the National Flood Insurance Program. And so
Yeah, and that's interesting because the fair insurance plan that doesn't touch tax dollars. That's not
mhm,
taxpayer funded. That's all private insurance. That's premiums. But as you said, it still trickles down to, at the end of the day, people who are insurance holders of those
yeah,
policies. And I
yeah.
believe, to put some numbers against it, I think that the current estimates of the loss in LA is 20 billion. I've seen on the lower end, it tends to be around 20 billion. On the higher end, I've seen numbers like 100 billion, which I feel like is maybe that's factoring other things like health or
Hmm.
whatever else. But Fair in California, I think only has 2 billion in reserves or
Yeah,
something of that
something
nature. And
like
of
that. Yeah,
course,
significantly less.
right. Of course, these houses that have been lost, hopefully the families have private insurance first. But we know that once that trickles down to fair, it's not going to be sufficient, and it's going to be interesting to see this play out.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a very, it begs the question of is it fair? Does it make sense
I see
for,
what you do
yeah, I
there.
see what I did. Yeah, is it fair? Does it make sense for, for other insurance holders, but then ultimately, everyone who pays taxes, to be supporting financially, people who choose to live in these
Yeah,
areas? Do people have a right to live in these areas? Granted, they're very beautiful areas, and both of us live in
yeah,
them. But that's, I think, something that
yeah.
will probably become an issue later on.
That's I think that part for me is maybe the most interesting part of it, is that people always want to live in these areas. Like even right now, literally this whole destruction, everyone's like, we're rebuilding here because we want
Yeah.
to live here,
Here,
Altadena,
yeah.
the Palisades. And I think that's like I remember talking with some folks and they were like, well, do you think people will start leaving California? And it reminded me I don't know if you remember when we were in business school, we did a whole exercise during COVID around, oh, everyone's leaving New York. What is going to be the future of New York City?
Oh
And
yeah, I
we had
remember
this
that
like,
exercise.
right, we had this like doom and gloom scenario of, oh, no one's going to want to live in New York anymore. Remote work is here to stay and all these things that honestly didn't pan out. And had we maybe purchased real estate in New York at that time, in the middle of this doom and gloom,
Yeah,
like we would have done great. So
yeah.
the most fascinating thing for me is people always want to live here, but what's going to happen, slowly as insurance premiums keep going up, maybe it's only the richest who can afford to live in these prime areas and pay these insane premiums. And maybe it means that the city of LA needs to do a better job of housing people in these more inland areas, the interior kind of most, I guess, downtown, not just downtown LA, but like the
Like
most
protected areas. Yeah.
protected areas, right? And that might mean denser housing. That might mean changing kind of city planning to move
Mm.
people down.
I mean, I think these are all super important, interesting questions coming from two renters who don't
Yeah. Who
own
know
our,
nothing about
who know,
insurance, by the
yeah.
way.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't, none of us, neither of us have paid home insurance.
Well, to be
Um,
honest, did this disaster, did this make you question buying a house?
Yeah, I mean, for us in Northern California, the risk is always been earthquakes, right?
Earthquakes, yeah.
The fire. I mean, I saw the statistic and it's crazy, but the LA fire apparently burned in terms of acreage, like 1.5 San Francisco's or something like that. Like the area
Mm,
was just so massive. But San Francisco as a city itself is protected by fire. I mean, just given, it's a peninsula. So that is fine. So the fire risk isn't as relevant here, but the earthquake risk is definitely real. Myself and everyone else has definitely pulled up those maps of which areas of the city are more protected from earthquake risk. And the marina, which is one of the most expensive parts of the city, is just built on landfill. And if there is an earthquake, that section of the city is just sliding right into
oh
the
God.
ocean. So yeah. It's tough. I think as humans, we're really not well equipped to think about these things, to think about
Yeah.
these tail risks or these black swans, because
Yeah.
they don't happen often, but when they do, it's
Yeah.
very destructive.
Well,
Yeah.
it definitely has me on high alert right now. We're thinking about moving apartments just for renting, and we're
Yeah.
looking at some apartments nearby the beach. And suddenly I'm like, what about a tsunami? So
So it
I
is
will
impacting your
say
decision thinking.
a little bit, maybe more so than it needs to, but it did make me think about the nature of owning real estate, and especially very expensive real estate, which a lot of these homes are worth more based on market value than
Mhm.
insurance will pay out. In some cases, insurance maybe three times more than what insurance will pay out. So it made me think, is it worth putting all that value, all that kind of capital? And obviously, it's real estate's a great asset class, and it's a tangible hard asset. It's a utility that you can, it has actual utility, but um, yeah, I know natural disasters can, so quickly change that.
I think that's everything that I had on my agenda for the day. Hopefully we'll be back to covering more optimistic news soon. But I
Yeah,
think just given how close it hit to home for this one for you at least, I think it was important to talk about.
yeah, definitely. And for all those who might be affected or know people who are affected, we hope that they're able to rebuild back stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. LA is a tough place. I think you'll do fine.